And this is Mick, the Doctor of Digital.
And welcome to Love Letters. Love Letters are a collection of love stories. Some people get lost, get crazy, and disoriented in the name of love. Another week, another great episode. Amid all the changes in dating culture, the 2025 analysis makes clear that certain principles never go out of style. Honest communication, genuine respect, and importance of first impression. What does the early Christian tradition teach us about why these basics are so foundational, and how can an ancient wisdom help us practice them more effectively in our contemporary context?
Well, this is part two of part one. This is all the second section here, but you've identified something that the early Christians understood profoundly. What appears simple on the surface is actually incredibly difficult to sustain, which is precisely why it requires not just willpower, but spiritual formation. The basics of relationship, communication, respect, presence are not easy techniques to be mastered, but virtues to be cultivated through practice, community, and what Christians have traditionally called dying to self. Let's begin with communication. The early church father St. James writes about the tongue. See how great a forest a little fire kindles, and the tongue is a fire. He understands that human speech is extraordinarily powerful and extraordinarily difficult to discipline. But James doesn't just warn about the dangers of speech, he also teaches about its proper use. Effective communication in the biblical sense is not primarily about technique or eloquence. It's about aligning our words with reality and speaking truth in love. The Greek word for this kind of truthful communication is parousia, often translated as boldness or frankness, but carrying the connotation of speaking truth directly without manipulation or hidden agenda. In the early church, parousia was considered essential to the Christian community. Believers were expected to speak honestly about their struggles, their needs, and their concerns. This wasn't optional, it was understood as necessary for genuine friendship. The same applies to dating relationships. Communication isn't effective because we've mastered certain conversational techniques, but because we've cultivated the courage to be genuinely ourselves and the commitment to honoring the reality of the other person. Contemporary psychologist Dr. John Gottman has spent 4 decades studying what makes communication effective in relationships. His research identifies 4 patterns he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that predict relationship failure: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. What's fascinating is how closely these align with ancient Christian understandings of vice. Criticism reflects pride, the assumption that we're qualified to judge the other comprehensively. Contempt reflects envy, the inability to celebrate the other's goodness. Defensiveness reflects anger, the refusal to accept responsibility. Stonewalling reflects sloth, the unwillingness to do the hard work of engagement. The solution, both in Gottman's research and in Christian tradition, is the cultivation of opposing virtues. Against criticism, humility and charitable interpretation. Against contempt, gratitude and honor. Against defensiveness, honesty and accountability. Against stonewalling, perseverance and presence. Notice that these are not communication techniques, but character qualities. That is why the basics are so hard. They require not just learning new behaviors, but becoming different people. Now let's address respect. The Christian concept here is dignitas, the inherent dignity of every person as a bearer of God's image. In early Christian communities, this was revolutionary. Roman society was deeply hierarchical, with vast differences in social status determining how people were treated. Christianity insisted on a radical equality before God. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. This didn't erase differences in role or gifting, but it established a baseline of equal dignity that could not be violated. Dr. Emmanuel Levinas, a 20th century Jewish philosopher, argued that the face of the other makes an immediate ethical demand on us. When we encounter another person face to face, we are confronted by their vulnerability, their subjectivity, their irreducible otherness. And this encounter obligates us to treat them with care. This is exactly what happens or should happen on first dates. We're not evaluating a product or interviewing a candidate. We're encountering a person whose dignity precedes and exceeds any use we might make of them. Which brings us to first impressions. The wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible is full of counsel about the importance of how we present ourselves. Proverbs 27:19 says, "As water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart." The early Christians understood that our external presentation, how we dress, speak, carry ourselves, is not as separate from our internal character, but expressive of it. This doesn't mean we should be obsessed with appearances, but it does mean that carelessness about how we present ourselves often reflects carelessness about the encounter itself. There's a concept in Christian moral theology called reverentia, reverence or appropriate awe. We prepare carefully for things we consider significant. The care we take in preparing for a first date communicates our assessment of the encounter's importance. If we show up disheveled, distracted, or unprepared, we're communicating, however unintentionally, that this meeting doesn't merit our full attention or effort. But here's where Christian wisdom offers a crucial corrective to contemporary anxieties about first impressions. While we should prepare appropriately, we must avoid the pride of thinking we can control how we're perceived or that our worth depends on making a perfect impression. St. Augustine's doctrine of grace reminds us that our fundamental worth is not achieved through our performance, but given by God. This should free us from paralyzing anxiety about first impressions. We prepare respectfully, but we don't need to pretend to be something we're not, because our dignity doesn't depend on the other person's approval. There's a profound passage in 1 Samuel 16:7 where God tells the prophet Samuel, "Man looks on the outward appearances, but the Lord looks on the heart." This is sometimes misused to suggest that external presentation doesn't matter at all, but the real point is subtler. Humans naturally judge by appearances, which is why we should present ourselves thoughtfully, but ultimate judgment belongs to God, which is why we shouldn't be enslaved to others' opinions. We care about first impressions, not to manipulate, but to communicate respect, but we aren't defined by them. The Christian practice of examen, daily examination of conscience, is relevant here. St. Ignatius of Loyola taught believers to review their day, noting where they communicated well and poorly, where they showed respect and where they failed, where they were fully present and where they were distracted. Applied to dating, it means regularly reflecting. Did I listen actively? Did I speak honestly? Did I honor the other person's dignity? Did I bring my full presence to the encounter? Dr. Dan Siegel's research on interpersonal neurobiology shows that humans are wired for attunement, the capacity to sense and respond to each other's internal states. When we're present fully in conversation, when we listen actively without planning our next comment, when we notice and respond to subtle emotional cues, we create what Siegel calls resonance, a sense of being seen and understood that is fundamental to connection. This is what the biblical tradition calls shema, deep listening that goes beyond hearing words to understanding the heart. Hear, O Israel, Deuteronomy 6:4, is not just about auditory reception, but about attentive presence to God. The same quality of listening is required for human intimacy. In conclusion, the timeless principles of communication, respect, and first impressions remain foundational, not because they are easy or obvious, but because they reflect deep truths about human personhood that ancient wisdom has always understood.
Mr. Meg, how does the Christian covenant model provide an alternative framework for dating with purpose? And what can biblical wisdom teach us about the relationship between commitment and flourishing?
This might be the most countercultural aspect of Christian wisdom for our contemporary moment. The insistence that freedom is found not in maximizing options, but in making deliberate choices and then fully investing in those choices. The covenant model is fundamentally at odds with the consumer mentality that has colonized modern dating, and that's exactly why it offers liberation to people drowning in options overload. Let's start with the biblical concept of berith, covenant. This is not a modern Western contract where each party agrees to certain conditions and the agreement holds only as long as both parties fulfill their obligations. A biblical covenant is a binding commitment that creates a new relational reality that persists even through failure and disappointment. God's covenant with Abraham doesn't depend on Abraham's perfect performance. God's covenant through Christ doesn't depend on our worthiness. The covenant itself creates obligations, not the other way around. Applied to dating, this means that purpose comes not from having a perfect mental checklist of attributes we're seeking, but from cultivating the capacity to recognize a fundamentally good person and then choosing to commit to building something together. The early church fathers distinguished between bonum utile, useful good, and bonum honestem, honorable good. A useful good is valuable because it serves our purposes. An honorable good is valuable in itself, regardless of its usefulness to us. The consumer dating model treats potential partners as bonum utile, valuable insofar as they meet our needs. The covenant model recognizes persons as bonum honestem, valuable in themselves, worthy of commitment, not because they optimize our preferences, but because they possess inherent dignity and goodness. The Jewish tradition offers extraordinary wisdom to the concept of choice or free will. The medieval philosopher Rabbi Moses Chaim Luzzatto taught that the purpose of human life is to exercise meaningful choices that align us with the good. But here's the crucial insight: meaningful choice doesn't require infinite options. In fact, too many options paralyze our capacity for choice because we're so anxious about choosing wrongly that we can't choose at all. Purpose in dating means establishing clear criteria rooted in values, not just preferences, and then exercising choice courageously when we encounter someone who meets those criteria. St. Augustine develops this theme in his doctrine of ordinato dilectio, rightly ordered love. Augustine argues that human beings are defined by what they love, and our happiness depends on loving the right things in the right order. The person who loves everything equally loves nothing truly. The person who refuses to prioritize, who wants to keep all options open, ends up deeply attached to nothing. Dating with purpose means ordering our lives properly. We prioritize covenant faithfulness over novelty, depth over breadth, commitment over the illusion of infinite possibility. Contemporary decision science supports this ancient wisdom. Dr. Barry Schwartz's research demonstrates that maximizers, people who insist on finding the absolute best option, experience more anxiety, regret, and depression than satisficers, people who establish acceptable criteria and commit to the first option that meets them. Psychologically, the pursuit of the perfect partner undermines our capacity to appreciate the good partner we found. We're constantly wondering if someone better is out there, and this wondering poisons our ability to invest fully in the present relationship. Dr. Eli Finkel's research on marriage further reinforces this point. His studies show that the highest functioning relationships are not those where partners were most compatible at the outset, but those where partners invested most intentionally in growth and development. In other words, the quality of a relationship is determined more by what you build than by what you find. This contradicts the entire logic of dating apps and options overload, which assume the relationship success will come from finding the right match rather than building something together through commitment and effort. There's also the Christian virtue of fidelitas, faithfulness or constancy. In a culture obsessed with novelty, faithfulness seems boring or limited, but the biblical tradition understands faithfulness as the very foundation of flourishing. God's faithfulness to his covenant is the anchor of Israel's identity. Christ's faithfulness to the cross is the source of redemption. Human faithfulness in a covenant relationship creates the security necessary for vulnerability, growth, and deep intimacy. When you're always wondering if someone better is out there, you can never be fully vulnerable with the person you're with. Purpose in dating means cultivating the capacity for faithfulness, the ability to say, this person is enough, and mean it. The Jewish wedding tradition includes the breaking of a glass, which symbolizes, among other things, that this choice is definitive and irreversible. It's a rejection of the modern mentality that wants to keep an exit strategy always available. The broken glass says, we're burning the ships, we're crossing the Rubicon, we're all in. This is terrifying in our commitment phobic culture, but it's also liberating. When you know you're going to stay, you can invest fully. When you're always keeping one eye on the exit, you're never fully present. Dr. Brene Brown's research on vulnerability identifies certainty as one of the primary enemies of authentic connection. When we demand certainty before we commit, when we insist on examining all options and removing all risk, when we actually prevent the very intimacy we claim to seek, vulnerability requires risk. Covenant requires a leap. Dating with purpose means being clear about your non negotiables, character, values, faith, while remaining humble about your negotiables, specific preferences that may matter less than you think. It means being willing to commit to someone good rather than endlessly holding out for someone perfect. A parent doesn't give a child infinite options about whether to play in traffic. A wise parent structures choices to make the good option clear. Dating with purpose means recognizing that not all options are equally good, that some choices lead to flourishing and others to emptiness, and that clarity about this is liberating, not limiting. The monastic tradition offers an interesting parallel through the practice of stabilitas, stability or commitment to a particular community. Medieval monks took vows not just to monastic life in general, but to a specific monastery. They were saying, these particular people in this particular place will be my community for life. This seems restrictive to modern sensibilities, but the monks understood that depth requires limits. You don't develop profound spiritual maturity by monastery hopping. You develop it by committing to a place and people and working through all the difficulties that arise. The same applies to romance. Depth doesn't come from keeping your options open. It comes from closing options and investing in what you've chosen. In conclusion, the covenant model offers a liberating alternative to the paralysis of options overload by teaching that purpose in dating comes not from maximizing choices, but from cultivating the character and wisdom to recognize fundamental goodness, the courage to choose definitively, and the faithfulness to invest fully in building something together.
Mr. Mac, the final theme from the 2025 dating analysis is what's being called mindful dating. The emphasis on self knowledge, knowing what you truly want, and refusing to settle out of desperation or social pressure. But there's a tension here. How do you remain clear about your needs without becoming so rigid that you reject good people over minor incompatibilities? What does the Christian tradition teach us about the relationship between self knowledge, discernment, and the humility to recognize that we might not know ourselves as well as we think?
You've identified the exact tension that makes this so difficult, and the Christian tradition offers a more complex understanding of self knowledge than our therapeutic culture usually admits. The biblical view is that self knowledge is both essential and elusive. We must pursue it, but we must do so with profound humility about our own capacity for self deception. This is very different from the modern assumption that you simply know yourself through introspection and then find someone who matches your discovered preferences. Let's begin with the Socratic principle that was absorbed into Christian thought: know thyself. This ancient wisdom was inscribed at the Temple of Delphi and became central to classical philosophy. But what's often forgotten is Socrates believed self knowledge was incredibly difficult precisely because we are naturally self deceived. His entire philosophical method, the famous Socratic questioning, was designed to help people recognize how little they actually know about themselves. The Christian tradition deepened this insight by adding the doctrine of sin, which teaches that our own self understanding is systematically distorted by pride, fear, and desire. The prophet Jeremiah articulates this starkly. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? This is not pessimism, but realism. Our desires are often confused. What we think we want may not be what we actually need. What we claim are non negotiables may be preferences we've elevated to absolutes. What we think will make us happy often doesn't. St. Augustine's Confessions is essentially an extended meditation on the difficulty of self knowledge. Augustine describes spending years pursuing what he thought he wanted: success, pleasure, intellectual recognition, only to discover these things left him empty. His eventual conversion came through the painful recognition that he had been wrong about himself and that his truest desires had been buried under layers of distorted wanting. The early church developed the practice of spiritual direction partly in recognition that we need ourselves on outside perspectives to truly know ourselves. We're blind to our own blind spots. The Jewish wisdom tradition offers the concept of accounting of the soul. This is a regular practice of self examination, but importantly, it's not just asking, what do I want, but are my wants rightly ordered? Are my desires aligned with what is truly good? This suggests that much of what we think we know about our preferences is actually just the result of where we've happened to invest attention and energy, not a discovery of some essential unchanging self. Applied to dating, this means that mindful dating requires more than just getting clear on your preferences. It requires interrogating those preferences. Are they based on genuine values or on cultural scripts you've absorbed unconsciously? Are you confusing preferences with principles? Are you excluding people who would actually be good for you because they don't match some mental image you've constructed? This is difficult work that requires both self awareness and self critique. Jesus speaking about the speck in the log in Matthew 7 is relevant here. He asks why we focus on the tiny flaw in another person's eye while ignoring the massive problem in our own. Applied to dating, this means we're often hyper aware of how potential partners fail to meet our standards while remaining oblivious to our own issues and unrealistic expectations. Mindful dating requires turning this critical eye on ourselves. What am I bringing to this potential relationship? What are my issues? Where do I need to grow? Am I actually ready for what I claim to want? The Christian doctrine of sanctification, the process of being made holy over time, suggests that we're all works in progress. No one is the finished article. This should profoundly shape our dating expectations. If you're waiting to date until you've perfected yourself, you'll never date. If you're looking for someone who's already perfect, you'll never find them. Dr. Dan Allingdander's work on redemptive relationships emphasizes that the best partnerships are not those where two perfect people find each other, but where two broken people commit to mutual sanctification, to helping each other become more fully human, more fully themselves. This requires knowledge of what you need, but also humility about what you think you need. You need someone of good character, aligned values, and basic compatibility. But you probably don't need all 47 items on your mental checklist, and your future partner might bring qualities you've never thought to look for that end up being exactly what you needed. For example, sharing core values about faith, family, character, and life purpose, these are essential. But preferences about height, income level above a certain threshold, specific hobbies, or personality type, these are peripheral. Mindful dating means getting crystal clear on this distinction. The Jewish concept of believing that each person has a destined partner contains a subtle psychological insight. The Talmud teaches that 40 days before a child is conceived, a heavenly voice announces who they will marry. But later commentators note that this doesn't mean you wait passively for a cosmic sign. Rather, at a certain point, you must recognize that the person in front of you could be your destined partner, and then you must actively choose to make it so. The knowledge is both received and enacted. You discover who's right for you partly by choosing them and seeing what you can build together. Contemporary attachment theory, particularly the work of Dr. Sue Johnson, demonstrates that we often don't know what we need in relationships because our needs have been shaped by early attachment experiences that may have been dysfunctional. Someone with an anxious attention style might know they need constant reassurance, but what they actually need is to develop secure attachment through a relationship with someone consistent. Someone with avoidant attachment might know they need lots of space, but what they actually need is to learn intimacy with someone safe. Self knowledge isn't static, it evolves through relationships. St. Thomas Aquinas taught that prudence requires three things: good principles, accurate perception of circumstances, and the ability to apply principles to circumstances. Mindful dating requires all three: clarity about your values, principles, honest assessment of the person in front of you, perception, and wisdom about whether this person aligns with your values sufficiently to move forward, application. Mindful dating means actually dating people who seem promising rather than dismissing them immediately because they don't check every box. It means giving relationships space to develop before making definitive judgments. It means staying present and attentive to what actually is happening rather than what you expect to happen. But let's address the fear of settling. Settling is not the same as accepting that no human being is perfect, that every relationship requires work, or that the person you choose won't match every item on your wish list. The opposite of settling isn't holding out for perfection, it's committing to someone fundamentally good and then building something excellent together. Mindful dating requires attentiveness. You don't evaluate people quickly based on first impressions alone. You pay attention over time, notice patterns, and see how people behave in different circumstances. You give relationships space to reveal themselves rather than making snap judgments. In conclusion, the Christian tradition teaches that mindful dating requires the paradoxical combination of self knowledge and self suspicion.
Self knowledge and suspicion, indeed. Mr. Meg, and to wrap up, can you summarize the path forward?
The 2025 dating landscape reveals something remarkable, a culture in the process of rediscovering ancient wisdom it had forgotten. The movement towards slow dating, embodied presence, human connection beyond algorithms, honorable endings, purposeful commitment, and mindful self knowledge are not innovations, but recoveries. The recognition that the transactional, algorithmic, consumer model of relationship has failed to deliver human flourishing. Early Christian wisdom not offers not a set of rules, but a vision of a covenant relationship that transforms how we approach dating entirely. Rather than seeing relationship as a market transaction where we maximize our outcomes, the covenant model invites us to see a relationship as a sacred space where two image bearers of God commit to each other's flourishing through the practices of truthfulness, faithfulness, presence, discernment, and sacrificial love. As you navigate the dating landscape of 2025, remember that you stand in a long tradition of wisdom that has guided human relationships for millennia. You are not alone in your desire for something deeper, truer, more substantial than swipe culture can offer. The path of covenant relationship is narrow, but it leads to life. It requires character, courage, and commitment, but it offers what the algorithmic approach never can: the profound joy of being fully known and fully loved, the security of irrevocable commitment, and the transformative work of mutual sanctification that shapes us into the people we were always meant to become. The question is not whether you can find the perfect person. The question is whether you can become the kind of person who can commit to someone good and build something excellent together. In conclusion, that is the ancient path forward, and it remains as true in 2025 as it was in the first century, perhaps even more urgently needed now than ever before.
Mr. Meg, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Yes, people, amid all these changes in dating culture, swipes, algorithms, and digital flirtations, the 2025 analysis remind us that some truths never fade. Honest communication, genuine respect, and the power of first impressions. So, Mr. Meg, would you like to plug in something?
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn, GMIC, the Doctor of Digital Smith, PhD. Also pick up a couple volumes on Amazon, Burning America and On Track, Ian Hunter, and also listen to the Doctor of Digital podcast.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Meg, the Dr. Digital. And please do listen to our baby podcast, Mental Health 101. Mental Health 101 is created to empower our mental health awareness. So, Mr. Meg, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Until next time, Deus Volt.
More to come, people. See you soon.